Welcome to M.O.P classroom. I'm Humsa, Assistant Professor from Department of Commerce, BCom Accounting and Finance Shift 2 program. In today's session, I'm going to explain on the topic equivalent production under elements of cost accounting. Let me start by explaining the agenda for today's session. I'll start with brief on process costing, then need for equivalent production, its introduction and how to implement on problems. Process costing is a method of costing used in industry where the raw material is being processed in multiple layers and then converted to a final product. Now here is a flow chart where it explains how the raw material is converted to a final product. If you can see in this particular example, we have three processes starting from mixing, then moving on to heating and finally packaging. Once all the process is done, that's when it's converted to a final product. But in costing, we need to record for all the process. Now that's what we are going to see in today's session. Under equivalent production process, we first convert the uncompleted degree of production into a completed version and then allocate cost to it. Now here is a diagram which represents the same. Let us start by understanding the need for equivalent production. The first point says fair cost allocation. When I say fair cost allocation, I am focusing on not just the completed units of production but also the incompleted units of production. Now here, once the cost is being allocated to all units of production, be it completed or work in progress, I will be able to find an accurate cost per unit. Now once I find the accurate cost per unit, it is easier for me to make the decision and the efforts that is done by me is matched with my cost allocation. Moving on, let us start with equivalent production process step by step. Now here basically we all know the three major heads of costing, that being material, labor and overhead. For these three heads, the cost is being allocated under both completed units as well as incompleted units. When I say incompleted units, I refer to work in progress. Step 1 is to identify units, completed as well as work in progress. Under work in progress, we are going to cover all three heads, material, labor and overhead. Its degree of completion, whatever is not completed, is going to be converted to completed in order to find equivalent production process. Number 2 is to find out the degree of completion. This degree of completion information will be available in the problem. We are going to see it on the later slides. Calculate equivalent units. Now what we are going to do is we are going to multiply the degree of completion and the number of units to find out the equivalent units. Then finally we will allocate cost based on the heads. Now here is a problem that will help you understand equivalent production process in a better way. Let me read the problem for you. During January 2019, 1000 units costing 6000 were introduced in the process. So this is the opening cost that has been introduced. There was no work in progress at the beginning. At the end of January, 600 units were transferred to process 2. So out of the 1000 units, we understand 600 is moved to the next process account. 250 units were incomplete and 150 units had been scrapped. So here we can see 250 units are incomplete, which means it is in work in progress. Out of the 150 units that is being scrapped, almost 10% is considered to be normal loss and the balance 50 I will be explaining in the problem next. It was estimated that incomplete units had reached the following stages. We had three heads, material, labor and overhead, and its degree of completion is listed here. Direct material was introduced for 2700 rupees, direct wages for 3200, production overhead for 1600. The value of scrap is given, which is rupees 2 each. The units scrapped had passed through the process and were complete as regards with material, labor and overheads. We have understood the problem. Let me just give you a quick brief. There are around 1000 units input and it's costing rupees 6000. Now there is a work in progress of 250 units, 600 is being completed and around 150 being scrapped. Degree of completion for work in progress is listed here. We will now calculate to find out equivalent production units. Now let us start with the solution. Now in calculating equivalent production units, we have two columns, input and output. Input, we all know 1000 units is given in the problem. Of the output, 600 units is completed. If you can see the tabular column, I have allocated 100% under all three heads, which means it is fully completed. Now for the balance 400 units, We know around 250 is work in progress, and the degree of completion is also given in the problem, which is 80%, 60 and 60 for material, labor and overhead respectively. That is what is listed here, and accordingly I have multiplied to find out the number of units under each head. Now, once 600 and 250, around 850 is completed, let's see what happens to the balance, that is 150 units. Of this 150 units, around 100 is considered to be a normal loss. When I say normal loss, it could be out of a mere production process. Now, if it's a normal loss, we generally do not allocate anything under equivalent production, and that's why it is empty. The entire row is empty. Moving on to the balance 50, now this is what is considered as abnormal loss. This abnormal loss has the same degree of completion, that is 100, as what is fully completed. That's how we need to assume, and that is why it is 100% under all heads. If it is 100, 50 units comes under all heads. Now, after that, the final stage is to calculate under each head how many units is appeared. So, if for example, let me just start with material. In material, completed units is 600, there is no normal loss, we do not allocate that, and abnormal loss is 50 units and closing work in progress is 200, a total of 850. The same step is repeated for labor and overhead. Now, once we find this equivalent production, we are going to allocate the cost for these units. Let us start by knowing the cost per unit. Now, we have material of 8700, which is 6000 plus 2700. As far as scrap value is concerned, we know it is 2 rupees per unit. Now, we have 100 units of normal loss, need to multiply to subtract from material. Now, once we subtract it, we have 8500, which is the material value. Now, once we find out the material value, we need to divide it with the number of equivalent units to find out the cost per unit. By doing that, we found out that cost per unit for materials is rupees 10. Now, we need to follow the same procedure for labor and overhead. By doing this, we understood that it is 4 rupees per unit for labor and 2 rupees per unit for overhead, a total of 16 rupees. Now, this 16 rupees will be used in completed units. Let us see how it's done in the next slide. Now, here in this slide, we are going to find out the completed units value and the incompleted units. Incompleted units, I mean the work in progress. Now, under the units completed, we know it is 600 into 16 of total cost, which is giving us 9600 rupees. Under work in progress, we have 3 heads, material, labor and overhead. If you can see, there are 200 units, 150 and 150. If you wonder what it is, this is what we have found in equivalent production table. Now, that we need to multiply with the cost per unit to find out the overall work in progress, which is 2900. Moving on, let's see how this is implemented in process costing. Now, in this process cost account, on the left hand side, there are expenses like material, labor and overhead. Expenses are already listed in the problem. On the right, we have normal loss, we have process to account, we have closing work in progress and abnormal loss. Now, for normal loss, we know the scrap value is 200, that we can write. Process 2, again 9600, we found out from completed units. Closing work in progress from the previous slide, which is 2900 rupees. For abnormal cost of 80 units, we need to multiply with the total cost of rupees 16 per unit. By doing this, we are getting 800. Now, let us see how this abnormal loss is being explained. Now, under abnormal loss, on the left, we have transferred from the process 1 account, which is rupees 800. Of this 800, 100 rupees of cash is being remitted. The balance of 700 is being transferred to P&L account, and this is for final accounting purpose. By now, I hope you would have understood the uses of equivalent production. Without it, we would have just gone ahead with 600 units and ignored that 250 units. But because of knowing equivalent production, we were able to allocate the cost in a better way. I hope this session was useful for you. Thank you for watching. To watch more such videos, like, share and subscribe M.O.P Classroom.